Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. Their Eyes Were Watching God. By Zora Neale Hurston. Zora Neale Hurston's novel Their Eyes Were Watching God was released in 1937. The book was first ridiculed by critics, but it has now been hailed as an essential and groundbreaking work in 20th-century African American and women's literature. Various mediums, such as stage productions, cinema, and radio dramas, have since been adapted. The plot revolves around Janie Crawford, a lady on a quest for self-awareness and the ability to speak up for herself. When Janie is a young girl, her grandmother decides to marry her off so that she might inherit money and a comfortable life. When Janie meets Joe Starks, she decides to leave her husband of many years and move to an all-black town with him. In no time, Joe becomes mayor of the town, but his affection for Janie begins to deteriorate. To him, a wife should be seen, not heard, therefore he's trying to keep her quiet. For many years, Janie pretends to be meek before exploding into a rage and yelling at Joe. Shortly later, he passes away, leaving Janie a very wealthy widow. She goes through a period of attempting to figure out who she is and what her goals are. Virgil, also known as Tea-Cake, is a younger man that she meets soon after. After they marry and leave town to look for a job in the Everglades, she and Tea-Cake decide to move to the Everglades together. While married for many years, Tea-Cake is infected by an uninvited dog and dies from the rabies that he had contracted from it. When a rabies-induced manic episode threatens to kill Janie, she has no choice but to kill her husband. She is put on trial, but she is found not guilty, and she is free to return to the town where she served as First Lady and see her old friends. In spite of all the chatter, Janie insists that she doesn't care what people think and is delighted to have discovered love, no matter how brief, even if it was fleeting. A woman named Janie Starks is walking down the major road in the south of the United States as the sun begins to set. A lovely woman, with long and straight hair, the town inhabitants gather on Phoebe Watson's porch to envy her beauty and wonder about the buzz around her. Tea-Cake, a man she was recently seen with, has taken her away. Shortly thereafter, she returned to town, but no one there had any idea what exactly transpired. Her money was allegedly stolen and he fled with a younger woman, according to their suspicions. Phoebe sticks up for Janie and chastises the other women on her porch for speculating about her relationship. She departs and decides to bring a tray of food to Janie's house to see how she's doing. Phoebe learns from Janie that she has returned to town alone after deciding to end her relationship with Tea-Cake. In the Everglades, she lived with him, but she realized it wasn't for her and left. As Janie's story continues to unravel, Phoebe begins to question her meaning. The story of Janie begins in Chapter 2. In the backyard of the White family, Janie was nurtured by her grandma. Janie often played with the family's white children and had no idea she was black until she saw a photo of herself. The other students at her school make fun of her because she doesn't have parents and since she lives with a white household. Mr. Washburn's dogs tracked down and killed her father once it was discovered that he had gotten her mother pregnant. It is true that Janie's family often overlooks the fact that her father wanted to marry her mother. Once her grandmother has saved up enough money, Janie's grandmother plans on moving in with her granddaughter. When Janie is 16, her grandma has the audacity to catch her with her lips locked on the lips of a local guy. A wealthy old farmer named Logan Killix is her grandmother's choice for a husband for her daughter. As a black woman, Janie's grandmother feels that she is the world's mule because of the way she has been treated by society, and she doesn't want to see her granddaughter become a muley. When Janie gets into an argument with her grandma, the latter tells her about the difficulties she has to deal with. Slavery was a way of life for Janie's grandmother, Nanny, who was raped frequently by her lord. He left for the Civil War a week after she gave birth to a daughter named Leafy. It was obvious to Leafy's mother-in-law that she was the master's daughter based on the color of her hair and eyes. She was so enraged that she intended to sell the baby as soon as she was a month old and whip Nanny. When Nanny learned of this, she made the decision to flee with her infant son and remained hidden in the swamps until the war ended. After that, she went to work as a nanny for the Washburns. Although she hoped Leafy's life would improve, the young woman was sexually assaulted by her high school teacher. Janie was born as a result. Eventually, Leafy succumbed to his melancholy and alcoholism, and he left town on his own. In the wake of this, Nanny confided in Janie with all of her expectations for her daughter. As soon as Janie hears this, she starts making plans to marry Logan. She's aware that she doesn't love him, but she's hopeful that after spending some time with him, she will. It's a big, celebratory event when the wedding is over. Since then, Janie hasn't developed any feelings for Logan. To get advice, she goes to her grandmother, Nanny, who tells her that she should be thankful for the fantastic match she's made. After telling Janie that love will come, she sends the girl back to her parents. Nanny prays for Janie's well-being as she leaves. Nanny dies soon after this. In the course of a year, Janie begins to doubt her feelings for Logan and, as a result, sinks deeper and deeper into depression. When Logan first met Janie, he was courting her and spoiling her, but as time passes, he begins to tell her that she is too spoiled and pressures her into helping around the farm. Janie notices a man walking down the road one day when Logan is out, and she begins to converse with him. He's a smooth-talking, fashion-conscious man with huge intentions, and he is Joe Starks. He claims to be from Georgia and has traveled to Florida to settle in the new community that is being created and will be managed solely by African Americans. Joe and Janie have a covert rendezvous and flirt for a time. Whether or not she is in love with him, Janie wonders. During their first 2 weeks of meeting, Joe tells her that he wants to marry her and divorce her husband. Janie and her husband get into another argument that night. On the next morning, she sets out to see Joe and they are married and head to Florida. Upon their arrival in the Florida town, however, the newlyweds are disappointed to discover that it is nothing more than a collection of hastily built shacks without a mayor in charge. Janie is shocked to hear that Eatonville, the town she's been living in, is barely 50 acres in size. Joe buys 200 acres of property from one of the town's landowners in cash. Captain Eaton, the donor, tries to make a pass at Janie but fails. After purchasing the land, Joe holds a town meeting to announce his plans to construct a store and a post office on the property he has purchased. In order to develop Joe's store, he hires 2 workers with the names Coker and Taylor. Afterwards, he gives the rest of the town instructions on how to assist in the recruitment of new citizens. The community begins to attract more residents and thrives. Taylor urges Janie to make a speech when Joe is sworn in as mayor. As a rule, Joe says, wives should not speak in public. Janie is enraged by this, but she chooses not to speak up. After a while, Joe's excessive spending on nightlife makes Janie suspicious of him. The residents of the town began to admire and aspire to the life of Janie. Because she and Joe dwell in a beautiful house and everyone else lives in shacks, they think they're acting like they're superior to everyone else. Joe sends a man on the run because he believes he's been stealing from him. In the eyes of the villagers, Janie's husband is viewed as a harsh, demanding individual. When Janie works at the local store, Joe forces her to cover her gorgeous hair with a rag, which the residents find oppressive. Even still, they don't do much to overtly challenge Joe's rule. Janie is becoming increasingly unsatisfied with her life as she continues to work at the business. Joe slaps her face one day following an altercation. Janie reminded herself to keep her rage contained and to treat her husband with decency at all times. On the other hand, later in the day she is shopping at a local supermarket when several of the men sitting on the porch begin to disparage a local woman. Janie has a hard time keeping her mouth shut when she sees them misbehaving. She informs them that they have a distorted view of women. She goes on to say that they can get away with being large and tough because the only things they have to fight against are other women and chickens. Just be quiet, is all that her husband advises her. As the years pass, Janie's dissatisfaction with her existence only grows. Despite the fact that she considers fleeing, she does not believe there is a safe place for her. Janie notices Joe's aging features and sagging skin as she walks by. Using her age as a way to get her to focus on her own appearance rather than his, he tries to get her to ignore him. Joe's temper deteriorates with age, and one day he lashes out at Janie for an error she made at the grocery shop. When Janie finally unleashes her rage at him, she accuses him of being old and disrespectful to his drooping body. The men on the porch and the rest of the customers in the business are shocked by the slur. Angry, Joe strikes out at his wife in a fit of wrath because he fears that his name in the town has been tarnished, and so he drives her out of the business. Joe has since relocated to a different part of the house as a result of their altercation. Soon, his doctor informs him that his kidneys have ceased working, and his condition rapidly worsens. Janie meets her husband in his room after hearing this news. Their chat swiftly devolves into a spat, and Janie lets out the long-suppressed rage she's been holding in for years. Joe breaks down in tears, terrified he will die. Soon after, Joe succumbs to his injuries, and Janie is forced to take stock of her life. She removes the cloth from her hair, which Joe ordered she wear, and announces to the village that Joe has died. She comes to terms with the fact that she is enraged at her grandmother for instilling in her the idea that money, power, and comfort were the only things that mattered in life. Janie decides to follow her aspirations instead of pursuing her current career path. Janie realizes that she prefers to be alone for a while because she enjoys the feeling of freedom that comes from being able to do as she pleases. Phoebe tells Janie that she is frightened that the village would believe she isn't upset over her husband's death, and Janie admits that she doesn't care what the town thinks. The store is still run by Janie. Janie is flirting with a tall, gorgeous younger man one day when he enters the room. There aren't many guys who show respect for women by inviting them to play a game of checkers against them, so Janie is shocked by this. Afterward, Janie inquires about his name, and they begin to play. He claims to be Virgil Woods, but his friends and family refer to him as Tea Cake. Before saying their goodbyes, the two continue to flirt. Even after Janie's last meeting with Tea Cake, the two continue to meet up to play checkers and chat. Despite the fact that she enjoys his company, the town begins to speculate about their relationship. There are some people in Janie's life who think Tea Cake is too low class for her. Tea Cake asks Janie if she believes the tales about him being a rascal. The best thing about him, says Janie, is his ability to be a wonderful friend rather than a lover. Tea Cake gets enraged and tells her that he prefers her to her. A young man, Janie says, will feel differently in the future. Janie is concerned that she has offended Tea Cake, who has been out from town for a few days. A broken-down car and an announcement that their relationship will be made public are the only evidence of his homecoming. Precautionary advice. Phoebe tells Janie that Tea Cake will take advantage of and exploit her and is just interested in her money. Janie claims that she has finally found a man who will treat her the way she wants to be treated with Tea Cake. With Tea Cake by her side, she plans to close the shop and leave town, she adds. She claims to have tried her grandmother's way of life and now wants to lead her own life. As much as Phoebe attempts to fight with her buddy, she is overcome with joy and energy from her friend's joy. Wedded bliss. Janie and Tea Cake wed in Jacksonville, where Tea Cake is from, after leaving Edenville together. Even though Janie has fallen in love with Tea Cake, she is still wary of being conned out of her money. Another Edenville widow, Mrs. Tyler, left town with a younger guy and had her money taken. She remembers Mrs. Tyler fondly. $200 are secretly tucked under Janie's shirt, and she doesn't tell Tea Cake. However, Janie discovers that her money has gone missing just a week after they were married. Even though Tea Cake has vanished, Janie is concerned that he has stolen her money and abandoned her. However, Tea Cake will be back soon enough. When he found the money, he tells her, he was so happy that he immediately went out and bought a nice meal for his fellow train workers. The dinner grew into a night of fun and music, and he found himself wishing he had more time. She is upset that he did not invite her to this event, and he explains that the party was too lowbrow for her to attend. Throughout the rest of his life, Janie wants to be with him and share in all of his accomplishments. Tea Cake makes a promise to Janie that he would pay her back, and he gambles to make good on that commitment. He wins $322 in a single day. Janie confides in Tea Cake that she has $1,200 in the bank because she has faith in him. To his delight, Tea Cake assures her that she would never have to touch anything, saying that he will always take care of her. He promises to find a job in the Everglades, so they're off to the Everglades. Tea Cake takes Janie to the Everglades, where he teaches her how to hunt with him. Tea Cake and Janie start working in the fields together so they may spend the entire day together. While working hard and chatting with the Edenville workers, she wonders what the town's residents would think. Janie develops a friendship with Mrs. Turner. However, despite her own race's antipathy towards it, Mrs. Turner claims that Janie should not marry Tea Cake because he is dark-skinned. She claims to have a light-skinned brother and wants him to meet Janie when he visits town. To Tea Cake's chagrin, Janie continues to chat with Mrs. Turner. Despite Janie's best efforts, Mrs. Turner brings her brother to town in the end. The threat Tea Cake feels is so great that he beats Janie to indicate that he still has control over her. After he apologizes to her, Janie does not harbor a grudge against him for the beating. Tea Cake and Janie, thinking that they can wait out the storm, end up waiting until the storm has already hit before fleeing the town. While Tea Cake and Janie are escaping the hurricane, a man-dubbed motorboat is also on the run from the flooding of Okeechobee's dams. They are forced to begin swimming in order to get out of the floodwaters, passing bodies and destruction as they go. Janie thanks Tea Cake for saving her from an angry, attacking dog when they arrive at Palm Beach the next day. Two men compel Tea Cake to dig graves for the hurricane victims at gunpoint, and they note that the white victims get coffins, while the black victims are unceremoniously thrown into a ditch and covered with quicklime. Janie and Tea Cake rapidly realize that Palm Beach is an extremely prejudiced community. In the middle of the night, The couple flees the town and returns to their home to discover it in good condition. The community has already begun to rebuild and the majority of their pals have made it through the storm. However, Tea-Cake quickly feels ill and is unable to eat while helping with the rebuilding. Tea-Cake's rescuer, who was bitten by the dog while trying to save him, was most certainly infected with rabies, according to the doctor. To save him? He says it's too late. Janie is accused of cheating on Tea-Cake with Mrs. Turner's brother by Tea-Cake, who is infected with rabies. However, as Janie discovers that he is fast asleep with a gun under his pillow, she is terrified of him once more. When he fires at her, she sets the gun such that it will go through 3 empty chambers before shooting. This gives her extra time to respond if he does shoot at her. It's only later that Tea-Cake deteriorates to the point where he pulls the gun on her, but the firing pin clicks through an empty cartridge when he does so. He pulls the trigger twice more while Janie tries to grab the rifle from him. Janie realizes she has no choice but to shoot him with the gun she carries. Every black person in the community gathers to see Janie's murder trial as soon as it is announced. Former friends of Janie begin to testify in her defense. Dr. Tea-Cake, who diagnosed Janie with Tea-Cake's illness, testified in her defense. It is Janie's emotional testimony that eventually clears her in the jury's mind. When Janie holds a funeral for Tea-Cake, the town's males realize they've been cruel to her. They can't help but beat and expel Mrs. Turner's brother due to their sense of culpability. To honor Tea-Cake's memory, Janie returns to Edenville with only a packet of seeds. All of Janie's tales to Phoebe are now complete. She tells her buddy that she is thrilled to be back in Edenville and that she feels like she has fulfilled her dream of living in the Everglades with Tea-Cake by returning to the town. Because of her reputation, she doesn't care what the people in the town think of her. She believes that they have no concept of what real love is, and that they have never experienced it in the way that she has. Janie is melancholy as she lies in bed that night, thinking about Tea-Cake. Nonetheless, she recognizes that Tea-Cake will always be there for her and that she is at peace with it. Janie Crawford, Killix, Starks, Woods, the main character. As she explains her recent absence to a buddy, Janie's life story unfolds. It is a story about Janie's struggle to find her own identity, despite the fact that most of the narrative concentrates around her relationships with various spouses. It is Janie's first and final appearance in the novel where she is seen alone. At the beginning of the novel, she is a young girl who is unclear of who she is or what she wants out of life. By the end of the story, she has returned to Edenville as a proud and strong lady. She only knows that she aspires to a harmonious relationship with the natural world and a reciprocal affection. When Janie first meets Joe Starks, she feels that his enthusiasm for life and great ideas will help her break free from the drudgery of her daily routine. Joe convinces her that he will help her fulfill her aspirations, but Janie rapidly finds that Joe's passion for power suffocates her. She unleashes a strong tirade of rage at him just before he succumbs to his final illness. With this newfound freedom, Janie begins to see that she doesn't have to conform in order to uncover her true self. This is exemplified by her removing the headscarf that Joe had forced her to wear to hide her gorgeous hair from him. When Janie gets married, she learns a lot about herself, but it doesn't change much from her marriage to Joe. Janie is mostly taught how to harness the power of her own silence. Towards the book's conclusion, Janie informs Phoebe that words alone are worth nothing without evidence to back them up. Tea-Cake, Virgil Woods, Janie's third husband, who proclaims his love for Janie and wants to marry her immediately after meeting. In order to help Janie realize her dreams, Tea-Cake is primarily designed as a catalyst for self-discovery. While Janie had already begun to find her own voice, he is an important part of her spiritual development. Janie's first and second husbands simply saw her as a worker and a silent wife, but Tea-Cake enjoys chatting to and playing with Janie. He is supportive of her thoughts and character traits. Even if Tea-Cake is essential to Janie's growth, that does not mean that she must have him. After his death, she is able to stand on her own 2 feet and return to Edenville a more self-sufficient individual. Joe Starks, Janie's second husband. Power-hungry, self-serving jerk who only cares about his own personal gain. In other words, Joe's treatment of Janie has nothing to do with a personal animus toward the woman. It's possible that he doesn't love her, but he also appears to marry her because he believes she may help him achieve his ambitions. His sense of self-worth comes from relying on a display of authority. If he is not crushing someone, his joy is short-lived. As a result, Joe has a strong desire to rule Edenville and all its inhabitants. He's elected mayor in a matter of days, and his time is consumed with political strategy and public perception of the community. Joe's need to keep Janie mute and confined has made her miserable and dissatisfied in their marriage. By assaulting his sense of authority and his desire to live, she ultimately rebels. Phoebe Watson, Janie's best friend in Edenville. Despite the fact that Phoebe appears in only a few sections of the novel, she is essential to the story because it is via her conversation with Janie that she relates her story. Phoebe, as a character, is a typical individual. She wishes to pursue her aspirations in the same way as Janie, but she is constrained by her marriage to do so. The story ends with her telling Janie that she was inspired by the events described in the story. Janie's narrative has inspired the author as much as it has inspired her, and she wants the same for her readers. Nanny Crawford, Janie's grandmother. Janie is raised by a former slave when her mother goes on the run. To Nanny, money and security are more important than love and happiness, and she only wants Janie to be financially secure and affluent after she dies. However misguided, Nanny is showing her affection for Janie in this manner. In her quest for safety and wealth, Nanny embodies the mindset of those who lived during the slave trade. It is only when Janie is defying her grandmother's wishes that she begins to seek her own pleasure and freedom. She was born on the 7th of January 1891 in Nottesluga, Alabama, where she would spend the rest of her life. Hurston was born to a Baptist preacher and a school teacher, and was one of 8 children. In Eatonville, Florida, in 1894, the Hurston family relocated. As a town founded and governed solely by black people, Eatonville was a pioneer in the United States in this regard. A few years later, Hurston's father was elected mayor and was named the town's principal preacher by the town's elders. Hurston, who later left Eatonville, always considered it her hometown and used it as a setting for many of her writings as a way to highlight how the lives of black people were untouched by whites. Remarried, Hurston's father sent her to live in Jacksonville, Florida, in 1904. Her father eventually stopped paying her tuition, and she was ejected from the school. Hurston had no other choice than to begin working as a maid for the Gilbert and Sullivan Theatrical Company's lead singer's wife. In 1917, at the age of 26, Hurston enrolled in Morgan College, a historically black institution of higher learning in Baltimore, Maryland. Howard University's student newspaper, The Hilltop, was co-founded by Hurston in 1918 and she obtained an associate's degree there in 1920. During the Harlem Renaissance, a movement of black writers in New York City in the 1920s, Hurston was one of its most prominent members. Hurston's most famous work, Their Eyes Were Watching God, was published in the early 1930s. Hurston had already established himself as a successful short story writer, having worked for a number of publications and published numerous pieces. Other Hurston works from the 1930s include Jonathan's Gourd Vine and Moses, Man of the Mountain, 1939. Hurston worked for a number of well-known publications throughout the 1940s and 1950s. Hurston also went back to school, earning a bachelor's degree in anthropology and conducting ethnographic research by the time she was 37. Although Hurston's work began to be criticized later in her life, she fell into oblivion. In January of 1960, at the age of 69, she succumbed to heart disease due to financial difficulties. When novelist Alice Walker and literary professor Charlotte Hunt discovered her unmarked grave after 13 years, they erected a gravestone. Consequently, the public's interest in Hurston's work was resurrected. Currently, she is regarded as a classic novelist, with an annual celebration held in her honor in Edenville, Illinois. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.